Ari, welcome back for chapter 9 of Enola Holmes. So in chapter 8, Enola hasn't quite made it to London yet, but she did make it to a town where she will take a train to London. She is dressed as a widow because it will make her look older and it will cover her face and she can wear her comfy shoes. She was going to buy a train ticket, but on her way to buy a train ticket, she heard a paper boy calling out that his paper had news about the Duke's son, and he is missing. They think that he was kidnapped. And so that really makes Enola wonder, like, maybe I should look into this. So she bought a newspaper instead. So now in chapter 9, we're going to see what she does about that. There are a couple things in chapter 9 you should know. So back in this time, and still, but more prominently in this time, in England, there were different, classes of people. Like, people would be better than others. Like, royalty is obviously the top, and then really poor people, that's at the bottom. But in kind of the higher middle section, there are noblemen, and in that there are dukes, viscounts, and marquesses. So all you have to know about them is that they're considered better than your average people. A ewer is like a pitcher. Matutinal means it happens in the morning, and ablutions are like washing. So a matutinal ablution would be a morning shower. Chapter the 9th. At a tea shop beside Belvedere Station, I sat at a corner table, facing the wall in order to lift my veil. I needed to do this for two purposes: to breakfast upon tea and scones, and to look at young Viscount Tewkesbury's Basilweather's photographic likeness. Occupying nearly half the front page of the newspaper, a formal studio portrait showed the boy dressed in... Heavens have mercy! I hoped he wasn't made to wear velvet and frills every day, but how else might he go about with his fair hair, rendered artistic by the curling tongs, hanging to his shoulders? All too apparently, his mother had fallen in love with little Lord Fauntleroy, wretched book responsible for the agonies of a generation of well-born boys. Got up in the height of Fauntleroy fashion, little Lord Tewkesbury wore patent leather buckle slippers, white stockings, black velvet knee pants with satin bows at the sides, and a satin sash under his black velvet jacket with its flowing white lace cuffs and collar. He stared at the camera with no expression whatsoever on his face, but I thought I saw a trace of hardness around his jaw. "Duke's heir of tender years horrifically missing," screamed the headline. Reaching for a second scone, I read, "A scene of the most alarming implications unfolded early Wednesday morning at Basilweather Hall, ancestral home of the Dukes of Basilweather, near the thriving town of Belvedere, when an under-gardener noticed that one of the French doors of the billiards room had been broken into. The household staff then being alerted, next discovered that the lock of the room's interior door had been forced, the woodwork showing the marks of a vicious knife. Naturally fearful of burglary, the butler checked the silverware pantry and discovered nothing missing. Nor were the plate and candelabra of the dining room disturbed, or the innumerable valuable contents of the drawing room, the gallery, the library, or anywhere else in Basilweather Hall's extensive premises. Indeed, no further doors had been forced downstairs. It was not until the upstairs maids commenced carrying the customary ewers of hot water to the ducal family's quarters for their matutinal ablutions that Viscount Tewkesbury, Marquess of Basilweather's chamber door, was found standing ajar. His furnishings, strewn about the room, bore mute witness to a desperate struggle, and of his noble personage there was no sign. The Viscount Lord Basilweather's heir, and indeed his only son, a mere 12 years of age— 12! I exclaimed, incredulous. What is that, madam? Asked the hostess behind me. Nothing. Hastily I lowered the newspaper to the table and the veil to cover my face. I thought he was younger. Much younger, in his curled tresses and storybook suit. 12! Why, the boy should be wearing a sturdy woolen jacket and knickers, an Eton collar with a tie, and a decent manly haircut. Thoughts, I realized, all too similar to those of my brother Sherlock upon meeting me. Poor lost Lord Tewkesbury, you mean? Aye, his mother kept him a baby. One hears she's wild with grief, unfortunate lady. I pushed back my chair, left a halfpenny on the table, exited the tea shop, and after entrusting my carpet bag to a porter at the railway station, walked towards Basilweather Park. This would be far better than searching for bright pebbles and birds' nests. Something truly valuable was to be found, and I wanted to find it. And I believed perhaps I could. I knew where Lord Tewkesbury might be, and I just knew, although I didn't know how to prove it. All the way up the long drive lined with giant poplar trees, I walked in a kind of trance, imagining where he might have gone. The first gates stood open, but at the second gates a lodge-keeper stopped me, his duty being to keep the idle curious newspaper reporters and the like out. He asked me, "Your name, madam?" "Enola Holmes," I said without thinking. Instantly, I felt so inexcusably stupid. I wanted to expire on the spot. Running away, I had of course chosen a new name for myself. Ivy Meshel. Ivy for fidelity to my mother. Meshel was a kind of cipher. Take Holmes, divide it into Hall, Mes, reverse it into Mes, Hall, Meshol, then spell it the way it was pronounced. Meshel. It would be a rare soul who could connect me with anyone else in England. Are you related to the Sussex of Meshels of Tottering Heath? Much less to anyone named Holmes. Ivy Meshel. So clever. Ivy Meshel. And now, like an imbecile, I had told this lodge-keeper, Enola Holmes. Judging by his blank face, the name meant nothing to him. Yet, if any fox hunt after me had begun, the view halloo had not yet reached this area or this man. "And your business here, Mrs. Holmes?" he asked. Having been a fool, I decided I might as well make the most of it. I said, "As Mr. Sherlock Holmes could not himself attend to this matter, he asked me to come and have a look about." The lodge-keeper's brows lurched, and he blurted, "You're related to the detective, ma'am?" "Indeed," I replied, my tone quelling, as I swept past him, marching into Basilweather Park. The hall, rising before me at the circular end of the drive, would have held 10 of Ferndale, but I did not approach its wide marble steps or its pillared doors. My interest did not lie in that of noble residence, nor in the formal gardens all around it, studded with topiaries and glittering with well-disciplined roses. Veering away from the drive, I walked across an expanse of lawn towards Basilweather Park proper, that is to say, the woodlands surrounding the hall and gardens. Not forest. Woodlands. Stepping beneath the trees, expecting to meet a few thickets, a patch of moss or two, some kindred brambles, I found instead soft grass trimmed short enough to play croquet upon. A tame place, this. Walking along, I discovered no interesting hollows, dells, or grottos. Basilweather Hall's estate was flat and featureless. How disappointing, I thought as I emerged onto lawn again. The only possibility might be... "Mrs. Holmes!" cried a wild soprano voice, and I turned to see the distraught mother, the Duchess, hurtling towards me. I knew it was she, because of the richness of her day dress, the heavy braiding and embroidery on her silver-grey capelet, over a gown of shirred mauve drawn back from a pleated underskirt of rose-grey satin. But there was nothing of richness in the tears stark on her staring face, and nothing of the nobility in the way she flew at me between the trees like a bloodied swan, wings of nearly white hair falling out from under her hat to flap about her shoulders. A pair of frightened-looking maids came hurrying up behind her. In their aprons and white lace caps, they must have run straight out of the house after her. "Your Grace!" they cried, coaxing. "Your Grace! Please come in, do! Have a cup of tea! Please, it's going to rain!" But the Duchess seemed not to hear them. "Mrs. Holmes!" I felt her bare hands trembling as she grasped me. "You are a woman with a woman's heart. Tell me, who could have done this evil thing? Where could my Tewkie be? What am I to do?" Holding her quivering hands in both my own, I felt grateful for the heavy veil hiding my dismayed face, grateful for the gloves that separated my warm flesh from hers so cold. Have courage, your grace, and, I fumbled for words. Be of good hope. Then I could blunder on. Let me ask you this. Was there anywhere... The way she doted on him, she might have spied or surmised. A place on the grounds where your son would go to be alone. To be alone? Her swollen, red-rimmed eyes blinked at me utterly without comprehension. Whatever do you mean? Sheerest nonsense, proclaimed a resonant outer voice behind me. This insignificant widow knows nothing. I will find the lost child, your grace. Turning, I found myself looking at the most extraordinary woman, even taller than I and far bulkier, shockingly hatless and uncoiffed. Her wiry hair spread about her head, shoulder to shoulder, for all the world as if she were a white lamp, and her hair a red shade, not chestnut, not auburn, but true red, almost scarlet, the colour of a poppy blossom, while her eyes glared out of her rice-powdered face as sooty dark as a poppy's black heart. So arresting were her hair and face that I barely noticed her clothing. I have only a vague impression of cotton, perhaps from Egypt or India, in some barbaric crimson pattern, petaled around her massive body as wildly as the poppy-hued hair around her face. The Duchess gasped. Madame Lelia? Oh, you've come as I begged you to, Madame Lelia. Madam what? Madam Spiritualist Medium, I surmised, this being one role in which women, the morally and spiritually superior gender, commanded greater respect than men. But such characters, or charlatans, as my mother would have it, evoke the spirits of the dead. And surely the Duchess most fervidly hoped her son was not one of those, so what was this oversized female doing? Madame Lelia Sibyl de Papaver Astral Purgatorian at your service, the statuesque one proclaimed. Whatever is lost I surely can find, for the spirits go everywhere, know all, see all, and they are my friends. The Duchess now seized upon this woman's large yellow-gloved hands, while I, like the two meek maids, stood there with my mouth airing, thunderstruck. But in my case, not by this woman's grotesque appearance, nor by her talk of spirits. While I wanted to believe that I would somehow persevere after my corporal body was gone, I imagined that if that were so, I would have better things to do than to knock on furniture, ring bells, and shake tables. Nor did the word astral impress me. Of all that, Madame Lelia Sibyl de Papaver had said, it was a single word that rendered me motionless and speechless. That word, purgatorian, from the Latin purgatus, meaning lost. Purgatorian, one who divines that which is lost. But how dare she, with all her blather of spirits, title herself so nobly? Knower of the lost, wise woman of the lost, finder of the lost. That was my calling. I was a purgatorian, or I would be, not astral, professional. The world's first professional, logical, scientific purgatorian. All in one gasping breath of inspiration, I knew this as surely as I knew my real name was Holmes. I scarcely noticed how the maids escorted the Duchess and Madame Lelia into the hall, perhaps for tea, perhaps for a séance, I did not care. Back in the woodlands that encircled Basilweather Park, I walked at random, oblivious to the drizzle that had begun to fall, my thoughts running wild with excitement, building upon my original scheme to find Mum. That plan remained simple. Upon arriving in London, I would hail a cab, tell the driver to take me to a respectable hotel, and have dinner and a good night's sleep. Staying at the hotel until I found suitable lodgings, I would set up bank accounts. No. First I would go to Fleet Street and place encrypted personals in the publications I knew Mum read. Wherever she was, would she not continue to read her favourite journals? Of course. I would wait until Mum replied. Just wait. That would suffice. If as I often found it necessary to reassure myself, if indeed Mum was alive and well. In any event, wait was all I could do, or so I had thought. But now that I had found my calling in life, I could do so much more. Let my brother Sherlock be the world's only private consulting detective all he liked. I would be the world's only private consulting purgatorian. As such, I could associate with professional women who met in their own tea rooms around London, women who might know Mum, and with the detectives of Scotland Yard, where Sherlock had already filed an inquiry concerning Mum, and with other dignitaries, and also perhaps with disreputable persons who had information to sell, and oh, the possibilities! I was born to be a purgatorian, a finder of loved ones lost, and I ought to stop dreaming about it and start doing it. Right now. The only possibility, as I had been thinking before, I was interrupted, seemed to be perhaps a tree. Backtracking through the boringly well-tended woodlands of Basilweather Park, I concentrated now on looking for that particular tree. It would be located not too near Basilweather Hall and its formal garden, and not too near the edge of Basilweather Hall Park either, but in the middle of the woods, where adult eyes would be least likely to spy. And like my refuge under the overhanging willow in Ferndale's Fern Dell, it had to be distinctive in some way. Different. Worthy of being a hideaway. The thin rain had stopped. The sun had come out, and I had nearly circled the estate before I found it. It was not one tree, actually, but 4 growing from a single base. 4 maple seedlings had planted themselves in the same place, and all had survived to form a symmetrical cluster whose 4 trunks rose at a steep angle from one another, with a perfect square of space in between. Planting one booted foot upon a gnarl and grasping a handy bough, I swung myself up to a stand, perhaps 3 feet above the ground, inside the encompassing V's of the trunks, a perfect axis at the hub of a 4-square leaf-encircled universe. Delightful. Even more delightful, I saw that someone, presumably young Lord Tewkesbury, had been here also. He had hammered a large nail, a railroad spike actually, into the trunk of one of the trees on the inside. No one walking by was likely to notice it, but there it sturdily jutted. To hang something upon? No, a much smaller nail would have served that purpose. I knew what this spike was for. To set one's foot upon. To climb. Oh, glorious day to climb a tree once again after so many weeks of ladylike confinement. But, oh, consternation, what if someone observed me, a widow lady in a tree? I looked all around, saw no one, and decided to chance it. Ridding myself of my hat and veil, concealing them in the leaves overhead, I hoisted my skirt and petticoats into a bunch above my knees, securing it with hat pins. Then, setting my foot upon the spike and seizing a branch, up I went. Twigs snagged my hair, but I didn't care. Except for the usual jabs in the face, it was as easy as climbing a ladder, a good thing, as my sore limbs protested every inch of the way. But Lord Tewkesbury, happily for me, had driven railroad spikes wherever no maple boughs presented themselves. Brilliant lad, this young Viscount. No doubt he had obtained the spikes from the tracks that ran past his father's estate. I hoped no trains had derailed on his account. After I had climbed 20 feet or so, I stopped to see where I was going. I tilted my head back. Good heavens! He had built a platform in the tree. A structure not at all visible from the ground when the trees were in leaf, but from my perch I could admire it clearly enough. A square framework made of scraps of unpainted lumber, set between the 4 maples. Supporting beams ran from trunk to trunk, wedged into place on tree limbs or else secured with cord lashed around the corners. Planks lay across the beams to form a crude sort of floor. I imagined him scavenging that wood from cellars or stable lofts or goodness knows where, dragging it here, maybe creeping out at night to lift it into the tree with a rope and set it in place. And all the time his mother applying the curling tongs to his hair and clothing him in satin, velvet, and lace. Heaven have mercy. In one corner of the platform he had left an opening by which to enter. As I popped my head through, my respect for young Lord Tewkesbury only increased. He had suspended a square of canvas, perhaps a wagon cover, as a roof over his hideaway. In the corners he had placed saddle blankets, presumably borrowed from the stable, folded to serve as cushions to sit upon. Into the 4 tree trunks he had driven nails, from which hung loops of knotted cords, pictures of boats, a metal whistle, all sorts of interesting things. I crawled in to look, but at once my attention was arrested by a shocking sight in the middle of the plank floor. Scraps, fragments, ragtag bits, cut and torn so dreadfully that it took me a moment to recognize what they were. Black velvet, white lace, baby blue satin, remains of what had once been clothing, and atop that heap of ruins, hair. Long, curled locks of golden hair. He must have shorn his head to stubble, after ripping his finery to shreds. Viscount Tewkesbury had entered this refuge, of his own free will. No kidnapper would have or could have brought him here. And by the looks of things, Viscount Tewkesbury had left his hideaway the same way he had come, of his own free will, but no longer to be Viscount Tewkesbury, Marquess of Basilweather. Okay, Ari, we're more than halfway through this book, and so we're a bit derailed from finding her mom. We're now going to try to find this Tewkesbury guy, who everyone thinks was kidnapped, but it's very clear to Enola now that he has run away. Do you think she'll still want to find him now that she knows? She also ran away. So maybe they think pretty similarly. I don't know. Do you think she's still going to try to find her mom? Okay, if you have any questions, just like always, you can ask Grandma or you can call me. Love you.